in Antalya. Yeah, we are in Antalya at the Congress, at the 8th National, that corresponds also to the 4th International Health and Management Congress here in Antalya, organized by the FAVMA Animal Veterinary Medicine Association, that is a Buiatrics association in Turkey. Today, the program is quite rich because we will start with a short announcement of the forthcoming European Buiatrics Congress. Then we will have the presentation of the Turkish Buiatrics Association, and also with the presentation of what are the characteristics of the Buiatrics in this big country, in Turkey. And then finally, the scientific part of our webinar that will be on the repercussion of the heat stress on farming system on animals. And the speaker is a distinguished speaker, Professor Peter Hansen. I will introduce him when his turn. That he gave the same presentation yesterday here at the Congress, and we asked him to be so kind to repeat the presentation for us, for the World Association for Buiatrics, because the topic is very important. Peter, Baumgartner is looking for your room. Can you, Peter?
So you get our presentation now?
Yeah, no, Peter Baumgartner is waiting. He's looking for the room where you are. You are at the first floor.
It's first floor, room 5.
Room 5. First floor, room 5. It is. Eventually, Peter, if somebody can come out of the room waiting for Walter. Okay. Anyway, so
do you see the slides?
Not yet. Not yet. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Now. Okay, so Rafael Gateo is a representative of the French Buiatrics Association that was already presented in one of our webinars. Rafael, please, for you just to advertise the conference.
Yeah, thank you, Arcangelo, for giving me the floor, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you are on the planet, I would say. So yes, that's my pleasure to introduce the next European Buiatrics Congress that will be held in Nantes, in France. And if you don't know where Nantes is, if you are familiar with the cartoon Asterix and Obelix, it's not so far from the village of Asterix. So please come and visit Nantes. Nantes, as I told you before, is located in the western part of France, very easy to access, both by flight and trains. So do not hesitate. That's a really very sweet city. Just quickly to tell you how will be organized the Congress, we will have 2 days of conference, fully in English for sure, together in parallel with the French Buiatrics Congress, which gathered every year between 600 and 800 vets and students. And so we have already the agreement of 8 keynote speakers, as you can see here. So we have a first one, which is Matthew Scott from Texas A&M, which will focus about omics and how it can be used by the practitioner on the field perspective. We have also Jessica McHart from Cornell University, which will give the recent updates in mineral disorders in dairy cows. We have David Black, a practitioner in the UK, which will address the issue of climate change and how practitioner can play a role in that. And we have also a presentation about antiparasitic resistance from Eric Morgan in Istanbul. And last but not least, we have also 4 very clever women which deliver presentations. So Sylvie Chastan from Maison Alfort in France, which will give an update about uterine health. We have also Sarah Deppenbrock, which is here also given the agreement that we have with American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine for inviting respectively both diplomates from both sides of the sea, of the ocean, I would say, with recent update of treatment of BRD. We have Ingrid Lawrence, one of our past president of ECBHM, as Arcangelo, and me, by the way, about the recent advance in the first day of life for the calf and how to improve resistance and resilience of calf. And last but not least, Nicola Gladden from Nottingham University, which will give a talk about pain management with a special focus around calving. So as you can see, very diverse topics and subjects. Okay, oops, sorry. And last but not least, regarding practical aspect, I invite you to visit the website at this address. So www.europeanbeatricongress2025.com. Okay, and so you have the possibility from yesterday already to submit abstract until the end of the year. And the deadline for abstract is 31 of December. So do not hesitate to apply either for both poster or oral communication. So as I mentioned, deadline 31st of December. So come and join us and we will be very happy to welcome you. And by the same occasion, we also welcome for sure the General Assembly, annual general meeting of the European College of Bovine Health Management. So really happy to welcome all diplomats, all residents from ACBHM, but also outside from Europe. Do not hesitate to come and to visit Nantes, and we will be very happy to welcome you. So thank you, Arcangelo, for giving me the opportunity to present that Congress.
Thank you, Rafael. And now we come back again here in Turkey. In Turkey at this Congress, as perhaps you can see, now it's lunchtime, is back, and therefore people are leaving the rooms and the exhibition room for going to have lunch. So, and now Professor Batmaz is going to present what is the pediatric situation in Turkey. Professor Batmaz is professor of internal medicine at the Veterinary School and University of Bursa in Turkey, and Professor Batmaz is the president of the Farm Animal Veterinary Medicine Association in Turkey, and is the president of the organizing committee of the next World Buiatrics Congress in Istanbul. Professor Batmaz, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Arcangelo. Greetings from 8th National and 4th International Health Management Congress from Antalya, Turkey. And dear colleague, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. And in Turkey, veterinary medicine education began in 1842 years, and there are 30 veterinary faculty in Turkey now, and active veterinary faculty, and approximately 32,000 veterinarians in Turkey, and one of them approximately 6,000 private veterinary clinics serve in the field of ruminant. And there are 60 million cattle population in Turkey, and one of them purebred 49%, crossbred 43%, and local bred approximately 8%. And dairy cattle, Holstein and common bred, and 10% Jersey, and crossbred Simmental 10%. And local breds, for example, Karacabey Brown and Southwest Red and gray, native gray bred. And in Turkey, 205,000 dairy cattle in lactation period in hundreds in intensive farm. And there are 42 million sheep and approximately 10 million goats population. And merinos most common in Turkey, purebred. And recently years, Zan goats increased. And also local sheep and goat breeds. For example, Akkaraman sheep, Kıvırcık sheep, and Honamlı goats. And farm animal Veterinary Medical Association was founded in 2014 years and was member of World Buiatrics Association in Dublin 2016 years World Buiatrics Congress. And also, FAVMA was nominated for Buiatrics Congress in Madrid 2022 years World Buiatrics Congress. And there are many activities of FAVMA and 7 national and 3 international health management congress. This congress only cattle and generally 500 and 1,000 delegates. And in this congress were recombinant speakers and large convention in ruminant field in the Turkey and surround round. And now we are currently organized the 8 national and 4 international health management congress. And this congress now there are 500 congress participation in the congress. 1,000, excuse me, 1,500 congress participation. And also 5 national and 2 international sheep and goat health and management congress. And this congress more small and 150 to and 300 delegates. And also we organized local education meetings. And go on and Vice President Hıdır Gençoğlu, go on now.
Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, I cannot see myself, but yeah, that's my turn. So now, yeah, I would like to share with you about WWBC in 2026, about our planning. So firstly, just I would like to share with you about Istanbul. Of course, Istanbul is a city in the world that's spanning in 2 continents between Europe and Asia, the world city. So, and this is our organization committee, is the president, our boss, it's Professor Hasan Batmaz, and all guys, and that's myself, Zafer and Hakan, you know, those, you know, also the other organization committee members. Yeah. Yeah, okay. And also there are some international members, some scientists. Those are will be including in scientific advisory board. We already contact with one of them. Of course, we are thinking and we add some people, of course, but right now those are in the scientific committee. Yeah. And also we have sessions. Those the title, some of the title of the session in here, like in you know, between internal medicine, heart diseases, immunology, genetic, welfare, and beef, you know, feedlot, biotechnology, and you know, public health. That is this kind of the title. So let's talk about the Istanbul. Istanbul, the world's 8th most visited city in the world, and according to 2019 years old, almost 14 million people visited Istanbul from the foreign country. And how about the Congress Center? The Congress Center, you know, in the Bosphorus, it's called Lütfü Kırdar Congress Center. And there are a lot of options, it's very accessible place. It's very close to downtown, and also it's just 7 hours walking to go to the downtown, the metro station. It's very accessible, and also there are a lot of hotel options. Yeah, so yeah, according to your performance, of course, because you're walking, but yeah, that's mean I would like to say just it's very close. And also there are a lot of hotel options between 3-star to 5-star. And Yeah. And this is the Congress Center. Of course, there are a lot of facility, and the room also, the space is very available. And we have enough space, and we organize everything. So, and tomorrow, actually on Sunday, also we'll visit that. And here's a view of the Congress Center. This is the Congress Center. Just from the Congress Center, we can see the Bosphorus. The view also is very nice. Yeah, the Istanbul, of course, you know, one of the most you know, dynamic city in the world, and 16, according to the data, we have the 16 million people live in Istanbul. So as I mentioned before, the accessibility in Istanbul is really good. You know, one of the most accessible city from around the world, and just 2 million people living only within 6 hours flight distance to Istanbul. This is pretty good, actually. And also we have some special discount for the delegates, and like, you know, 15% discount for economy class and 20% discount for business class. This is good as well. So, and there are a lot of activities, a lot of historical place to visit Istanbul. There are a lot of chance to visit that, like, you know, Blue Muskut, Galata Hall, you know, a lot of options to visit. And, you know, Basilica Cistern, and also the food, one of the richest cuisine in the world, in Istanbul. I'm pretty sure that we will be happy after you eat some food in Istanbul. Yeah. So, and we are planning some pre and post Congress tours, like the Cappadocia and like Nemrut, Ephesus, Virgin Mary, and Göbekli Tepe also. Yeah. No, we prepared a movie. Just I will show you this is our movie. Yeah, thank you very much. And we are really happy to see you in Istanbul, and we're more than welcome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hidir. Thank you, Professor Batmaz, for having presented the Congress. Just to remind to everybody that also these webinars are aimed to share what our association all around the world are doing, how they are committed in organizing something. And one of the goal, one of the aim of our World Buiatrics Association is to support the organization of congresses in order to share with the practitioners all over the world new experiences, new research results, and so on. And therefore also to organize a Congress. And I'm very happy. I'm appreciating what the Turkish colleagues are doing, because they are so committed and so enthusiastic in this commitment for organizing the next World Buiatrics Congress. So therefore, thank you, Professor Batmaz. Thank you, Hidir. Now we move to the scientific part of our webinar, and I am happy to introduce Professor Peter Jan Hansen of the university from in Florida. He graduated at the university in Illinois, and then did his PhD and Master in Science at University in Wisconsin. And immediately after finishing this educational training, he moved to the university in Florida, starting his career, arriving to the position of distinguished person, receiving a lot of recognition, a lot of award. I have a long list here. If we start, we will not enjoy his presentation. Therefore, I prefer to ask Professor Hansen to start immediately. The topic of today is of paramount importance. You all know the repercussion of the heat stress on cattle, on reproduction, on gynecology, on immunity, and so on. And Professor Hansen is, I would say, the best physiologist or reproductive physiologist for heat stress. Yesterday he gave this presentation, and we really appreciated. We enthusiastically followed it. Unfortunately, there is always a restricted time, so therefore I don't want to waste time. Professor Hansen, thank you again for having accepted to repeat your presentation, to double your effort here in Antalya. Therefore, the floor is yours. Thank you, Professor Hansen.
Yeah, thank you Thank you very much, Arcangelo, and thanks for the opportunity to present some of these ideas to all of you. I know that heat stress is one of the most important issues facing everybody involved in livestock production around most of the world, and that's especially true for dairy cattle. And I say that because the dairy cow is probably more sensitive to the negative effects of heat stress than are most livestock species. And the reason for that is because all of the metabolic heat associated with the production of milk. And this first slide I'm showing is one that I borrowed from a colleague of mine, Jose Santos, at the University of Florida. And Jose just compared the metabolic situation of a high-producing, lactating dairy cow with that of a high-performance human athlete. So the example I show here is from the Tour de France. So if you consider a human athlete, depending on their body weight, their basal metabolic rate, the amount of heat they produce per day, is about 2 megacals per day. But when they're engaged in extreme aerobic exercise, like racing in the Tour de France, their metabolic rate can go up 6 to 8 megacals per day. So the amount of heat production during this period of extreme exercise can be 3 to 4 times their maintenance energy requirements. And in order to maintain their body temperature, they have to lose all of that additional heat produced as a result of metabolism. So it turns out the lactating dairy cow is very much like a high-performance human athlete when it comes to heat production. So let's consider a dairy cow producing 45 kilograms per day of milk at peak lactation. Her maintenance energy is 15 megacals of metabolizable energy per day. But when she's lactating, because of the metabolic demands of lactation, there's an additional 55 megacals of metabolizable energy per day consumed by that cow. So that the total energy demands for that cow and the total heat production by that cow goes up to 70 megacals per day. So just like the Tour de France racer, that cow's heat production goes up 4 to 5 times during peak lactation. So she doesn't look like a Tour de France racer, but metabolically, she's much like such a person. And in order to maintain her body temperature, she needs to lose all of that additional heat to the environment. It's hard to think about, but at air temperatures as low as 25 degrees centigrade, dairy cows can have a difficult time losing all of their metabolic heat to the surrounding environment. As a result, they experience hyperthermia, and that hyperthermia, as well as the physiological changes the cow undergoes to limit hyperthermia, can have negative consequences on a variety of aspects of cow physiology and health. Milk yield declines, probably 15 to 20%. Fertility is inhibited. Pregnancy rates can be as low as 5% during severe heat stress. In a pregnant cow, fetal growth is compromised by heat stress, and that reduction in fetal growth not only affects the outcome for the calf, but it affects the milk yield of the cow itself because of the importance of the placenta for setting up the mammary gland for lactation. There's also evidence that heat stress can affect immune function, and of course, severe heat stress can lead to cow death. As I mentioned just now, there's really two reasons physiologically why heat stress causes all of those effects. The first reason is because of the increase in body temperature experienced by cows exposed to heat stress. So you can view heat stress as a force external to the cow that acts to drive that cow from normal body temperature, that acts to prevent it from losing all of its metabolic heat to the environment. The net result would be an increase in body temperature, and when body temperature increases, cellular function can be compromised. Mammalian cells are not designed to function at temperatures much different than the set point temperature. So, for example, the reduction in fertility caused by heat stress is largely because the oocyte and the early embryo cannot function at a temperature a couple degrees centigrade above set point temperature. So that's one reason why heat stress affects cows. The other reason is the adaptations themselves that cows use to try to maintain their body temperature. So when a cow's exposed to heat stress, it undergoes many physiological adaptations to try to maintain its body temperature. It increases blood flow to the skin, for example, to increase cooling, but that reduces blood flow to the digestive tract, blood flow to the mammary gland, blood flow to the fetus. One of the things cows do during heat stress is decrease their heat production so that they have less heat to lose to the environment. They do that by reducing feed intake. Probably about half of the drop in milk yield caused by heat stress is just caused by a reduction in feed intake. And then endocrinologically, the cow reduces milk yield by changing insulin sensitivity, by changing the ability of the cow to mobilize non-essential fatty acids. So the cow is trying to reduce her production to stay alive. So the negative consequence of that for a dairy producer is reduced milk yield. There's also adaptations at the cellular level that we don't think about too much, but there are a variety of systems in the cell that act to try to limit the effects of elevated temperature. One reason the embryo is so susceptible to elevated temperature, it hasn't acquired those cellular adaptations. And then there's also genetic adaptations. I'm going to come back to those. Because of natural selection, cows have acquired genes that make it easier or more difficult to regulate their body temperature, and also genes that make their cells better able to survive elevated temperature or less able to survive elevated temperature. So we have some opportunity to select cows genetically to make them more resistant to heat stress. So this is a huge topic, and those of you who heard me the other day knew I try to talk about it too much. So I've reduced the presentation today, and I'm just going to talk briefly about 3 strategies that can be used to minimize the effects of heat stress on dairy cattle. Probably the most effective and also the most expensive is to cool cows, just to reduce the magnitude of heat stress affecting the cow by changing its housing. There's also some opportunity to nutritionally bypass some of the negative effects of heat stress by changing feeding regimes. And like I mentioned earlier, even though this hasn't really been used very much in dairy cattle, there is an opportunity to modify the cow genetically to make her more resistant to heat stress. So let me jump right into these things and talk first about cooling cows. Cows are like every other mammal. They lose heat through 4 different mechanisms: conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. And these first 3 mechanisms all depend upon a gradient in temperature between the cow and the environment. When the environment gets hot, that gradient in temperature gets low, and cows are not very effective at exchanging heat via these 3 mechanisms. So in Florida, for example, where I live, it's oftentimes hot, and the main way cows lose heat to the environment in that situation is by evaporative heat loss, by using energy to convert liquid water to gaseous water. That's a very energetically expensive process. Cows do that by sweating. Cows do that by increasing respiration rate, which also have negative effects on the cow, but it does cool the cow. So people, especially ag engineers who are interested in improving animal housing during heat stress, try to manipulate all 4 of these modes of heat loss to reduce the magnitude of forces acting on the cow to cause her to become hyperthermic. So you can increase conductive heat loss by actually cooling the beds cows live on, by circulating cold water through it. Fans are used very extensively to increase convective heat loss, as well as designing barns to facilitate the natural movement of air through the barn. Of course, shade is an obvious remedy for negative effects of heat stress caused by solar radiation. So there's a lot of thought gone into modern dairy housing systems to maximize the inhibition of solar radiation impinging upon the cow. And cows are frequently wet by forced application of water on the surface of the cow, either sprinklers or sometimes misters that both wet the surface of the cow and also, when the water is evaporated into the air, actually cools air temperature. So lots of different strategies. I can't talk about all of them. Maybe the most advanced housing system for dairy cattle, and I saw a picture of one of these barns in Turkey just today, is either the tunnel ventilation barn or the cross ventilation barn. And both of these barns use a series of high performance fans to move air outside the barn. So they're not pushing air into the barn, they're pulling air outside the barn to create a wind tunnel to increase convective cooling by the cow. And then in addition, these barns contain one or more systems for wetting the cow, either sprinklers or more commonly misters, to provide evaporative cooling to both the cow and to the surrounding air. Here's a cross ventilation barn. It's just like a tunnel ventilation barn, except that the fans are located along the long edge of the barn rather than at the short end of the barn. These are probably more effective than tunnel ventilation barns. Key to these barns is air movement. So the proper design of these barns really requires the help of an agricultural engineer who works in the area of heat stress. You can see this big curtain here. This is placed strategically to ensure that when the air is being moved by these fans, it's being moved where the cows are and not other places of the barn. Serdal Dikmen, a Turkish scientist from Bursa University, he works with me a lot. He knows the state of Florida probably better than I know the state of Florida. And he's done a series of experiments looking at cow cooling, genetic aspects of heat resistance in cows. And he looked at the effectiveness of tunnel ventilation versus a more traditional freestall setup. So here's 4 barns in Florida. This barn over here is a more typical cooling system in the state of Florida. A roof to prevent solar radiation from reaching the cows, sprinklers along the feeding line. These sprinklers turn on 2 minutes, turn off 13 minutes, and keep the cow wet. And then these fans move air past the cow to increase convective cooling, but also to help evaporate the water on the surface of the cow. So over here is a tunnel ventilation barn. You can't really see it, but at the very end of that barn are the bank of fans that are moving air through the barn. You see these curtains here to move the air in certain directions. And there's also a misting system in this barn to cool the cows. And then here's 2 other facilities. This is a tunnel ventilation barn that was converted from a freestall barn. So it's not as effective as this purpose-built barn. So Serdal looked at seasonal variation in milk yield in tunnel ventilation barns and in freestall barns. And these are 4 of the farms he looked at. So this slide, I think, illustrates a few things. There is a drop in milk yield in the summer. So shown here is milk yield for the first 90 days of lactation for cows born in January, February, March, etc. So the blue line is the tunnel ventilation barns, and the red line are barns where cows are receiving sprinklers and fans. So both farms are actually doing a fairly good job cooling cows. There is a drop in milk yield, but it's only about 6% in the summer as compared to the winter for cows in the more traditional barn, and 3.5% for cows in the tunnel ventilation barn. So tunnel ventilation does a better job than traditional freestall barns, but both farms are providing a substantial amount of cooling to cows. You know, I would encourage, there's many different farming systems for dairy cows. Cows are in grazing systems. Cows are in all sorts of different facilities. Try to cool the cow as much as possible wherever you can cool the cow. This is a picture from a farm in North Florida. They keep all of their dry cows out on pasture. Probably not a good idea, but that's what they do because they don't have room for them in the barn. But you can see they've adapted this irrigation pivot to cool the cows while they're grazing. So they've modified the way the water is released from the irrigation pivot, so it's released as a mist underneath the cows. And as this pivot moves around the field during the day, the cows move with it. So they're seeking out this additional form of cooling. And it's important to cool cows during the dry period. I think many farmers give very little attention to the dry cow. But there's extensive evidence now that heat stress in the last 60 days of gestation, after the cow's been dried off, can have effects on the calf and on the placenta that affect milk yield for that cow and also for that calf when it becomes a cow. So here's the result of, I'm counting them, 9 experiments in which cows were either cooled during late gestation or not cooled during the summer months. You can see in each of those studies, there's about a 3 to 5 pound or a 2 to 2.5 kilogram per day increase in milk yield caused by cooling the cow during late gestation. And this will also be true for that calf when it becomes a cow. So cooling is super important. There's also some opportunities to manipulate the cow nutritionally. And I'm just going to give you 2 examples. I gave 3 the other day. Fat feeding. When cows are heat stressed, they eat less. And that's probably responsible for about half of the reduction in milk yield caused by heat stress. So the rationale behind fat feeding is inclusion of fat in the diet increases the caloric density of the diet so that each bite of feed from the cow has more energy than would otherwise be the case. So that could compensate for the lower feed intake during heat stress. Also, the amount of energy produced just by metabolizing fat, the heat increment, is less than for protein or carbohydrate. So maybe body temperature regulation is facilitated by that fact. Of course, cows don't like fat. So if too much fat is placed in the diet, it affects consumption. Fat can also cause a milk fat depression in the milk, so it has to be fed carefully. But here's the result of 4 studies that were summarized by Min et al. In this review article, showing beneficial effects of feeding different amounts of either rumen-protected or not rumen-protected fat to lactating dairy cows. So, a 5 to 10% increase in milk yield. There's also, that's a strategy just to increase the amount of energy available to the cow during heat stress. There are also a whole bunch of products being sold to combat effects of heat stress that are not based so much on providing more energy to the cow, but providing almost nutraceutical-like properties of feeds. Feedstuffs that contain molecules that affect the physiology of the cow, sometimes affect the ability of the cow to regulate its body temperature, like with yeast. Chromium affects insulin metabolism. Niacin increases blood flow to the skin. All of these molecules, or these feedstuffs, are proposed to have positive effects on the physiology of the cow during heat stress. And truthfully, we need to do more work on all of these molecules. But there is some evidence that at least some of these nutritional supplements can have positive effects during heat stress. So for example, feeding yeast to cows during heat stress actually affects the digestibility of the diet, but also improves body temperature regulation through some unknown mechanism. So here's a study from Jose Santos and his colleagues in which cows during heat stress were fed a yeast supplement, no change in dry matter intake, but you can see milk yield went up by 1.2 kilograms per day, and the cows fed the yeast supplement. Energy-corrected milk was not affected. There was a slight reduction in fat content of the milk. But what I find so interesting, if you look at body temperature during the afternoon when it's highest, it's actually lower in the cows fed the yeast supplement. You know, I think all these nutritional strategies are deserving of more research. You know, one of the characteristics of nutritional studies is that they're not repeatable from farm to farm. So there's really a need to do meta-analyses on these feedstuffs. And in many cases, it's not really been shown whether there's a special benefit of these diets during heat stress, or there's just a general effect of these diets on cow performance, and you would see the same effect in the presence or absence of heat stress. Okay, I just want to discuss one more aspect of heat stress, and that is genetic modification. So I come from a part of the world, Florida, where almost all the beef cattle have genes in them from Bos indicus, and that's because that increases resistance of the cows to heat stress. But there is not the equivalent opportunity in dairy cattle. The dairy cattle that we have selected for high milk yield are so much better than any kind of cow that's genetically resistant to heat stress. Makes crossbreeding not practical. But it turns out there are genes within the Holstein breed that are related to ability of cows to regulate body temperature. And you're going to see artificial insemination companies, genetic companies, like Zoetis, for example, is going to start publishing breeding values for thermal tolerance. So you'll be able to select a bull whose daughters are better able to regulate their body temperature than another bull's. This is illustrated here in this schematic. You know, let's say we have two bulls, bull 1 in blue, or actually they call it bull 2, and then another bull in red. And you can see that as temperature humidity index goes up, as the degree of heat stress goes up, the daughters of the bull in red have a reduction in milk yield. Whereas for the bull in blue, the daughters don't experience any reduction in heat stress. And it turns out this is pretty heritable. The thermal tolerance with respect to changes in milk yield, changes in fat yield, changes in fertility have a heritability of 0.15 to 0.25. So we can select cows, even within the Holstein, that are more resistant to heat stress. Now, there's one problem with that. I won't go through this slide in detail. There's a genetic correlation between thermal tolerance and milk yield, but it's a negative correlation. The more thermal tolerant the cow, the less milk she produces. Or the more milk she produces genetically, the less thermal tolerant she is. You know, this is the same kind of relationship we see between fertility and milk yield. The higher the milk yield, genetically, the less fertile the cow. But just like for fertility, there are probably bulls that are positive for milk yield and positive for thermal tolerance, even though on average, there's this negative relationship. And lastly, I just want to talk about one other event that's going on in the dairy cattle industry, and that is the introduction of genes that confer thermal tolerance from other breeds into the Holstein. So this has been done one time right now, successfully. This is a Senepol from the island of St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. And you can see all these wrinkles on her forehead, like she's kind of worried. This cow has a mutation in the prolactin receptor gene. Prolactin causes short hair, and these cows have shorter hair than other cows. About 90% of Senepols have this mutation. This mutation exists all over South America in the Criollo breeds, and it's been introduced into the Holstein via traditional crossbreeding techniques. So in the 1980s, Tim Olson at the University of Florida crossed Senepol with Holstein and then bred back to Holstein. So now we have cows that are 99% Holstein, but they have that same slick mutation. It's called the slick mutation because the hair is real slick, that the Senepol has. And that, I'm going to skip that. That makes cows better able to regulate their body temperature. Here's body temperature during the summer in normal Holsteins during the 24-hour day, and in Holsteins with the slick mutation. This is also work done by Serdal Dickman. You can see this big difference in body temperature, and that shows up when looking at seasonal effects on milk yield. So here is daily milk yield from freshening through the first 90 days of lactation for normal Holsteins in the winter in black and normal Holsteins in the summer in the open circles, about a 10% drop in milk yield. And then here are the slick Holsteins. The overall milk yield's the same, 40 kilograms per day, but there's no difference in milk yield between the summer and the winter. So there are now bulls available from Select Sires, ST Genetics, CRV, the LIC in Australia. So this gene is now available in, or cattle with this gene is now available. Okay, let me just end with a couple of predictions about future trends regarding heat stress. We're all legitimately worried about global climate change, which is going to make heat stress a more common problem around the world and a more severe problem than it is today. And in addition to that, when we increase milk yield, which I think we want to keep doing, we're going to make cows more sensitive to heat stress than they are today. But nonetheless, I'm optimistic that we can largely mitigate the effects of heat stress. I talked about some genetic strategies at the end of this talk, but also the technological strategies that are used. Cow cooling. When cow cooling is done most effectively, even in a place like Florida where heat stress is very severe, much of the negative effects of heat stress can be minimized. And, you know, I think there's a role for nutritional strategies, and I didn't talk about it, but for reproduction, we can manipulate the physiology of the cow to improve her fertility. So, you know, I don't think we should despair. Heat stress is bad, global climate change is bad, but we can do things about it. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hansen. It was very clear and very challenging, especially the conclusion with the future drivers of sustainability. I don't know whether we have some time for some questions. I don't know whether from the attendance. I have a question. You presented this Licky, in the meantime, the session starting again. That you hear the bell ringing. So you represented this leaky features. Is there some repercussion or has the coat color, the color of the coat, some influence on the heat tolerance of the cows? Because in Italy, for example, we have some local breeds that we consider quite heat tolerant because they have a white coat color, such as the Chianina breed or the Romagnola breed. And therefore, this is something that perhaps you can give some insight on that.
Yeah, one of the very first experiments I did at Florida was to compare body temperature regulation in white Holsteins and black Holsteins. And everybody laughed at me for doing that. But yes, the white Holstein is better able to regulate its body temperature, especially when solar radiation is involved, than a black Holstein. Most dairy producers in the US hate white Holsteins. Everybody prefers black Holstein, but actually, they think white Holsteins are crazy, but I say that's because they're not so heat stressed, so they can exert their normal behavior. The only issue is sunburn, because at least in Holstein, white hair is also associated with white skin. Cows on high clover pastures, there's a chemical in the clover that makes cows more susceptible to sunburn, and white Holsteins get more sunburn than black Holsteins. You know, the best animal is like the Brahman. I don't know the genetics there, but you're talking about like a gray Brahman has whitish to grayish hair, but the skin underneath is black. So it reflects a lot of solar radiation, but the solar radiation that penetrates is prevented from burning the skin by the melanin in the hair. So yeah, coat color is important.
Yeah, the same is for the Romagnola breed. They have a black color of the skin and white coat color, and therefore we consider very heat tolerant.
Right.
I don't know whether there are questions. I hear the bell ringing. If there are no questions.
Yeah, actually, Kajol, can I ask a question?
Yes, it is. Please.
Yeah, we are in the same room right now, the Professor Peter, and we are lucky, you know. And yesterday, I would like to ask, and Peter, you know, do you know Lance Baumgart, you know, from Iowa State? Lance has a theory, you know, immunological cost. So, as we know, during the heat stress, the meat production goes down. I'm just wondering, my question is, the decreasing of the meat production, is it related to the dry matter intake? Because dry matter intake decreases, of course, or related to immunological cost? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I've heard Lance talk about that. And so I think Lance's own research about 50% of the dry yield. Man, that was so good too. Yeah, that's a very good point. Lance Baumgart has been interested in effects of heat stress independent of the reduction in feed intake. So Lance's own data would say about 50% of the reduction in milk yield is because of reduced feed intake. So that must mean 50% is caused by other things. And they've shown that insulin sensitivity goes up during heat stress, which changes the ability of the cow to mobilize non-essential fatty acids. They have this idea, which actually goes back to sheep, that the reduced blood perfusion of the digestive tract that occurs because blood's going to the skin, that can cause leaky gut and cause damage to the epithelium of the gut and release of endotoxins into the cow, which can actually exacerbate the ability to regulate body temperature. So we actually tested that years ago by treating cows with Banamine during heat stress, thinking we'd block any prostaglandin-induced increase in body temperature, and it had no effect. But probably the more severe heat stress is, the more likely it is that there might be damage to the leaky gut, or to the gut, and cause endotoxin release. The immune cost, or the energetic cost of the immune system, yes, I've heard Lance talk about that. And I haven't personally had enough time to study that, so you might think I'm a little skeptical about that. I know in like rodents, the cost of activating the immune response is minimal. So I'm a little surprised that it would be such a big player in the dairy cow, but I don't want to say that he's wrong. I need to look at those data myself I mean, that's what he's proposing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hansen. In the meantime, we have received a test. So in the chat from Professor Sanusi from Nigeria, he writes a very educative discussion on heat stress. It is a very serious problem in Nigeria, especially in farms that have breeds from the temperate regions. Perhaps Professor Hansen, yesterday you mentioned the difference between the two species in the genus Bos taurus and Bos indicus. So therefore, in Africa, it could be if we import animals in Africa from our region, it will be a challenge. Eh?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you go back and look at the literature going back to the early 1960s, the way to increase animal production in Africa is to bring in breeds from Europe or breeds from the United States, and they always die. And, I think that's still true today. So, I mean, a lot of what I talked about was for systems where probably disease load is less, where feed availability is higher. Doesn't mean they're better production systems, but they have more resources. There are probably many farming systems where a Bos indicus, Bos taurus cross dairy animal would be the logical animal. So even in Brazil, a country with a very well-developed agriculture, there's really two kind of dairy systems. Systems based on the Holstein with a lot of housing, a lot of cooling, and then systems based on the Girolando cross between Holstein and the Gyr breed. And those Girolandos outperform a Holstein in environments where there's less investment in resources. So I'm sure that in many parts of the world, crossbreeding is a logical solution. There are, I talked about the slick mutation. There are companies trying to develop cattle for Africa using gene editing, where they try to rapidly put in multiple genes into the Holstein, like resistance to sleeping sickness and several other diseases. So I think you'll see that as well. Yeah, there's probably not one size fits all. That it does depend on the resource availability and what the price of milk and how much you can afford to invest in a farming system.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Professor Sanusi, you are. I think it could be good in the future to discuss on the strategy that we have been using to increase the production of cattle in Africa, because there are different strategies, including the one of importing European breed, and therefore this could be a good challenge. Professor Sanusi, keep in mind we could organize in the future one webinar on this aspect. So the correct strategy, sustainable strategy on how to improve production in Africa. So thank you. I think the bell is continuously ringing. I don't know whether it is also for us. Therefore, if there are not as an urgent question, I would thank again Professor Hansen for his kindness and availability to give. We are lucky that tomorrow he will give another lecture here on each choice on similar topics. And but so the bell is ringing, and therefore I thank you everybody, and see you in the next webinar. Peter, I think that we can close our webinar.
Thank you.